My name is Alan Gatlin. Many new faces here that I don't remember seeing in other classes, and so I do want to welcome you. Today's class, for those who can see the screen, is that we will have an opening ceremony and welcome. We will look at a few questions to consider before we begin, because the Tarot is really about perspective. We're going to talk a lot about that. And then we're going to take book 6, which is the Sacred Tarot, as edited and drafted by C.C. Zane. We'll spend approximately 1 hour in the material. We'll then go through our closing ceremony and then a question and answer period. As you probably can gather, in a 1 hour period of time, we will not be able to analyze or go through a detailed discussion or delivery, but what we're looking at is how this book particularly relates to the overall coursework and from a Hermetic perspective. So without further ado, I guess what we'll say is, can we do the opening ceremony? Vega.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone. Please take a nice deep cleansing breath and feel connected to the earth, either through your feet or however you do it. Eternal brothers and sisters, we are now about to open a Church of Light meeting in the customary manner. And in so doing, let us consider seriously the purpose of which we have gathered together. The purpose which, since the dawn of human intelligence, has drawn true brothers and sisters of the light into holy convocation. The purpose which, during all ages, has attracted the spiritual efflorescence of every epoch together at selected meeting places. The purpose which has ever impelled the noblest and most exalted souls of the earth to band together for a common effort. That purpose is to study nature's laws, to unfold the divine attributes of the soul, to secure conscious immortality, and to attain the royal grandeur that surrounds the true perfected human. As has been the custom for eons past, let us arise and face the east, from whence each day the sun first sheds his all-illuminating rays upon the children of the earth, and bear in mind that even as all energy, light, and warmth upon the earth are derived from the solar Father, so in truth all life, light, and love known to man are derived from God, the spiritual Father, whose all-providing care has symbolized in the minds of our ancient brothers and sisters by the orb of day. Let us now make the religion of the symbol of the religion of the stars. We stand to indicate active volition with right hand raised to heaven in aspiration to divine knowledge and power, and the left hand extended to earth as a pledge that each knowledge and power will be used only in spirit and in truth for the benefit of humanity. You may lower your hands and I will pronounce the invocation. O thou eternal spirit, in whom we live, move, breathe, and have our being. Consecrate this meeting of the cause of truth and righteousness. As brothers and sisters of the light, we seek knowledge of the shrine of goodness. Therefore, by virtue of our unselfishness and sincerity in desiring to assist in thy works, we ask the help of the legions of light in their protection from all forces of darkness. So shall it be.
Well, thank you so much for those words and the opening ceremony. I do want to welcome all of you. There are many faces here that I've not seen in our other reviews of the books by C.C. Zane and of the 21 volumes. So I encourage you to attend these classes. We're also in the student section. You will find that they're being recorded, and you can, if you cannot attend the live session, you're always welcome to attend at a later date. Are we recording at this point? Okay, very good. So we will begin. But before we do, Vega or Peg, do we have any announcements or any information that needs to be communicated to the group?
Well, I always like to remind people that the third Sunday of the month is the Sunday service. Tomorrow is that Sunday service. It's at 11 o'clock Mountain Standard Time. So that means if you live in Albuquerque, it'll be at 11. If you're somewhere else, check your timetables. And Meg Dissinger is the reverend for that day. And she always has a very unique way of presenting. So I think that you will have a wonderful time and get a huge insight into the sign Taurus. Thank you.
All right. And we do have a new member class coming up.
New member class.
it-
Oh, you mean
In
with
other words, is there
orientation?
orientation? Yeah. Mhm.
She did one on the 9th, and she'll probably do one every month.
All right. So if you've not sat through that in terms of understanding the various aspects of what we are and what we do, that's a great opportunity, along with a review of the website and learning all the tools. So I invite you to that. All right, so let's go ahead. I do have a series of questions because this, I think, puts us in the proper frame of reference and to start understanding and considering how especially C.C. Zane viewed the Tarot and its unique combination. So as a general question, how many have used the Tarot and what have you used it for? I know Kevin Day has and used it extensively. But how about others? What have you all done with the Tarot cards?
When I was starting out many years ago with Bota, that's when I got like some exposure to starting to color. I didn't continue with them, but I had gotten up to starting to learn more about the meanings, looking at the cards, doing some coloring, and then look at it for a while, trying to understand the readings that came with the lessons. That's about as far as I got. And I have a couple of tarot decks.
Neat. And we have in the comments section, using it for meditation, divination and guidance, self-reflection, a number of different items that you can see there in the chat box. So there's a diversity of application and use. And I think this is one of the most interesting aspects of the Tarot. So let's take it a step further. Why do you think the Tarot is referred to as the silver key? And you may speak aloud or you may write it in the chat box. Why is it called the silver key?
Because there's a lot of information encoded on it, like the Hebrew letters, I think the sign and the planet or something like that. I don't know it well, but there's a lot of information on it, I believe, that can help prepare you to, to further your studies.
Right. And I see several comments. Go ahead,
I like
June.
that it refers to the numbers, and I use it in that way. I used to use it more when I was younger and doing readings until astrology carried me away. I must have 5 or 6 different decks of tarot, and I like the Egyptian tarot with Brotherhood of Light best. I colored mine long years ago, probably 20, 30 years ago. I colored
and that's been mentioned. The original cards that Zane put together were black and white. And it was only in the 80s, correct me if I'm wrong, Vega or elsewhere, it was the 80s or 90s that they were colorized.
They were
so colorized. It was a fairly recent.
Very recently, since I've been here, and that's been since 2007. But they really speak to the unconscious mind, and that really helps to sometimes for me to understand what am I going through, or where am I at, or how do I read something.
That's his mute. So
yeah. And we're going to talk, Arthur asked a question about how does it relate to the golden key, and we're going to talk about that because there is a very strong and symbiotic relationship. And in the way that I understand Zane, really the gold and the silver keys are to be used together. While they have individual identities and they are tools that can be used separately, the most powerful comes when you incorporate them together in terms of confirmation. So that raises the number of the next question in terms of the important aspects in numbers and vibratory rate, since it was mentioned that numbers are also included. So what are some of the important aspects of numbers, and what's this about vibratory rates? Any thoughts on that? Why are numbers important?
Geometry.
Geometry, okay. And what is geometry?
Well, it's defined as measure of the earth, but it's basically it's almost like a symbolic language that I don't know what you want to call it, spirit or God, but everything moves in patterns. And the word pattern itself comes from paternal, which means father. And there is a pattern, that everything makes. It's called a circle. That's why kings wear crowns on their heads, because it's a symbol of sovereignty and wisdom. Like when you have been around the block, which is a square, which has 360 degrees, you acquire knowledge and wisdom.
Yep.
And that's why kings wear crowns on their heads.
And that's why it's a circle. And I think you've got it correct in that numbers are representative of symbols. They're just another expression of the symbolic. And vibratory rates are part of the cycles that this book starts to hint at. But later on in the books that we'll get into much deeper explanation of why everything around us is moving. And at the time that this was written, prior, 1936 is the date of most of the lessons that were taught here. The understanding of the atomic structure was still very elementary and little understood. We had only the beginning of it. And what Zane really pulled together was something that was before his time. And the understanding that everything is in movement, that everything has a vibratory rate, and that both the inner and the outer plane experience can be represented in terms of vibratory rate is fundamental. So let's move to that last question. How do you read the cards then? What does that even mean, reading the cards? Anyone have a thought on that?
Well, you have to do it intuitively, I think. It also has to have a kind of a pulling together of all the esoteric knowledges in the cards, because you have numerology, you have astrology, you have the pictures. If you're a visual person, I think the cards help you to learn even the astrological way of interpreting with the pictorial.
And you really kind of hit the nail on the head with the hammer.
I was just
that,
hit the valve right on the head.
Yeah, I mean, it is a representation, if you will, of where we are and how we feel and who we are. And that's why I also think that we're going to find that the combination of tarot and astrology, when together, is the most powerful confirming force that we have. It allows insight and revelation from within that otherwise we have only pieces. And we may be actually not necessarily going down the right path. This provides a level of confirmation as well. So let's take a look then and kind of go into it. But first, I do want to tie it in with book 5. I'm a firm believer that studying the books in order, even though sometimes it's very frustrating, you think, wow, this is an extremely stretched out process. is a critical aspect, because as we start getting deeper into the book, you will find that the cross references, the referrals, the pulling of information, both forward and backward, starts to become significant. With book 5, we learned that profound changes are really beginning to occur within us. And it's kind of like the movie The Matrix we talked about. You have the red pill and you have the blue pill. Once you decide to go down this road, you really have no excuse. And it does bring change into your life. Mostly positive, but also revelation of some of the negative aspects. So consequently, one of the things that, again, is a critical element is mental preparation. Putting yourself in a frame of reference that allows you to be receptive and also to not be distracted. One of the reasons that I'm a firm believer in doing the opening and closing ceremonies is a time to pause and to consider what we're doing. When I have been working with the cards, I may spend 15, 20, 30 minutes, sometimes even more, really calming myself, quieting my mind, opening my mind to understanding what is there, particularly with the reflection of the question, consistent with the astrological chart, both the natal and the progressed, and maybe the potential influences, depending on astrodynes, which we haven't talked about yet, of the where we are today, the minor progressed and the transits, but only as they relate back to the natal and to the progressed. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. So we also have to have very good clarity in terms of question and context. One of the things that I've struggled with and really have to force myself is to ask a good question that is very discernible and very well thought through and defined, and set it within the context of time and space. It is so easy to me to ask a general question that is so lacking specifics that there is no context and there is no absolute that is given. But when I can really mentally focus and take in and say, this is really what I want to know, and already have looked at the chart and say, what, based on where I am and the influences of the forces around me, how can I get further clarity? And maybe that's how I see a lot of how the use of the tarot is clarity and definition. Not necessarily, and I'm not using this in a divination process, but using it more for self-revelation and clarity consistent with the astrological perspective. So a little bit different than the way historically they've been used. So this book is constructed in a way that's a little different. So let's begin with the end, because the chapter 13, which for those of you, that's serial lesson number 33. And on pages in the book, 249 to 256, there's really 4 major themes. First is setting up the environment and organization of this lesson. Zane spent significant time talking about where you do your reading, what the surroundings are like, are you in the proper state of mind? Yeah, I don't think it can be overstated that it is so important that you bring and you will receive what you have prepared yourself for. If you are ill prepared, if you have not taken the time to lay out and to remove distractions and to prepare the surface, because I'm one that my wife complains about me, and appropriately so, that I don't clean my area. I don't have all the tools set out before me before I begin. And she says amen in the background. So it's a matter that doing this, that is a critical step of having not only your workplace well prepared, but having that mental process well prepared. Now, the way that the lessons are organized, we're going to get into a little bit, because this book is like this, just like the others, in that there are nuggets of information at the beginning of each serial lesson or chapter, and then he gets into the specifics. We are going to focus, and then he constructs the specifics around a certain format that we will discuss. He also, as part of this, talks about a system of randomization and how to shuffle the cards. Now, you'll note, for those of you who've read this already, that he refers to various methodologies, but never goes into the specific in this book. So the importance, though, is randomization and making sure that you are providing the cards that in a way that can give both a face and then inverted perspective, and that you are shuffling adequately. The methodology that I use is a shuffling of the deck 3 times, and also setting and dividing into groups of 3, stacking, restacking, shuffling, and then reversing. So it's, again, trying to get a randomization of the cards themselves, plus their perspective of being face up or inverted. Also, the importance, and this becomes clearer in some of the later books, is following the magnetic flow of north to south. How we turn the cards will impact, how we view them. So it's critical to turn them from the top to the bottom, not the bottom to the top. Why? Again, that will be further explained. But now, since we're going through a whole series on the sun of magnetic storms, that even becomes more critical, because its impact on the way that we think, the way we feel, and the way that we act, which is material for another lesson. Also, I think this admonition of point number 4 cannot be, again, overemphasized. Stick to the general applications and definitions until more experienced, and the need to practice regularly. My failure when I went through this material 3-4 years ago, gosh, pushing 5 years now, was that I looked at it but didn't do it. And the learning really comes twofold. First is in your methodology, writing out what the suits, what the numbers, what major and minor arcana represent to you, and be consistent with the definitions that Zane gives, but then also practicing these and applying it and seeing the information that you gain. And if there's need for additional refinement, understanding. Now, it may be that working with another person, particularly if they're about your level, can be a real sanity check as well. But I also think if you are not in a position where you have another individual, is the combination of this with the appropriate astrological chart in and of itself serves as that sanity check and that confirmation, and helps you to be able to refine that. One of the things that I've mentioned in the past, and I don't have the book out, is that I also will write in the calendar, the day calendar, the information that I gain from it and make note of it, so I can either refer back to it or see how it did play out, particularly if it's something that impacts over a period of time and how it changes. You learn by doing, you learn by experience, and then you make refinement based upon that. The way that Zane has this organized, and as I said, we'll go through that in just a minute, helps in terms of being able to understand that. So those are really the lessons. Yeah, repetition is Zane's way. Deborah really hit that one as well. So it's important to continue to do this. Now, if we start with chapter 1, which is the serial lesson. And depending on the book and the series of books that you're using, the page numbers I refer to may or may not be consistent with what you have. That's another reason to just say that the serial lesson will be consistent. And in the case of chapter 1 is serial lesson 48. Some of you may not have, I understand, a serial lesson or chapter 18, but you will have the serial lesson associated with the last chapter, and that is serial lesson number 33. So for those of you who are not working from the green student books, the serial lesson may be the way to look at this. Now, chapter 1 or serial lesson 48, which you'll notice is out of sequence, is one that we could spend an entire course on in and of itself. Kabbalah represents a lifelong examination and understanding. It is symbolism within symbolism. It is a, if you will, a symbol to represent, and one of the reasons they call it the tree of life. It is how, from that perspective, both individual as well as entities' existence is understood. On page 18 and 19, and again, this may or may not be consistent with the pages in the materials that you have, but what Zane did is presented something called a summary, and he presented 5 points of how to understand the relationship of Kabbalah or Kabbalism with the material that he is interpreting. Now, I'm not going to take the time to go through those only because it is so detailed, and this is a personal journey. One of the reasons that I'll defer on many topics and say, this is something you need to interpret and study is that while I can give you my understanding and my perspective of these things, until you examine and incorporate that into your life, it does not hold the same meaning, nor will it have the same impact, nor will it provide that, if you will, element of change that has to occur. The internalization of these materials become critical. One thing that I will say about that first chapter in that serial lesson is the law is critical elements and the law of association. And this is where I first started to get the idea that divination is possibly not the major emphasis of the use, at least from Zane's perspective, the use of the tarot, that it is a much broader respect and tie-in to the astrological. So while that extrasensory perception is tied with the physical perception, it is the combination of both that provides us with the addition of the numbers, with the addition of the Hebrew letters, and with the association with the planets and the various astrological symbols that provide the stew, if you will, the nourishment that we need to be able to incorporate into a full and complete explanation. So I'm hoping at some point, I was looking back through Church of Light TV and others, I don't believe that we have a lesson or teachings on Kabbalah, but I believe that's something we ought to add to the list, that someone do a series on that. And I hope in the future that we can add that material, because Zane, our interpretation of Hermetics is so aligned with this. And yet we do have some unique approaches that we want to take advantage of. Serial lesson 22, which is chapter 2, is the foundation of science. And Zane makes on page 23, I think one of the most profound statements is that Tarot is the one standard textbook on the meaning of universal symbols. What in the world does he mean by that? What do you guys think? Why is the tarot
Numbers.
so profound? Numbers? Okay.
Numbers are a language that aren't bound by race, creed, or color or class. They are a universal language. All of nature speaks it.
Okay. And, you know, if we, as we meet with others, creatures and creations within the galaxy, there will be a combination, a common element of mathematics and numbers, and that symbology. Absolutely. What other ways
I was gonna say,
does a tarot?
I was gonna say it covers the journey of life.
Very much so. Kevin Day and I both are members of another organization, another Hermetic organization, and we sat through a lecture by a gentleman that used the major arcana as a description of a journey, of a life journey. Now, this was particularly tied to Freemasonry, but yet I think is general enough as well to say this is the journey of a spiritual being. When you look at starting with the Fool, and then what's the last card of the major arcana?
The world card or the universe.
Yeah. So we move from a learner, from something very basic and impoverished of mind, possibly of body, to integration with the whole and all the steps that occur in between. So like the example that we've used before of the onion, every time we peel back a layer, we find that there's more and more meaning and attachment and organization to it. On pages 24 through 26, he starts talking about the use of numbers. And in the next chapter, we get into more of this in the science of vibration, how numbers are also a representation of vibratory rates, light, hearing, the essence of matter and mass is all tied to vibration. And he does a pretty interesting explanation there in these 2 pages talking about that. Page 31, the origin of tarot cards. Now, this is a hotly debated item of whether this has to do with the Roma people, commonly called gypsies, whether it truly goes back to Persia, whether it goes back to Egypt, whether it goes back to wherever it goes back. But the most modern use probably can be tied back to the weight deck seems to be one of the most common. And he talks a little bit about that. Interestingly enough, the author of that deck, or one of the co-authors of that deck, was also a Mason, which is, I think, also one of the reasons that in the explanations that he starts to give, that he has these separate definitions and these separate categorizations that he will use throughout. So when we look, what he starts to do here is that in the next chapter, we will see that he will break down by certain segments. And he also talks about something that I use a lot, and that is the 5-card spread. But he uses it in a little different way. Rather than assigning and defining the use of the individual cards within that spread, and that's page 36 through 37, he assigns a numerical value to whether the card is facing you or inverted, and a simple yes or no answer. There are also more interesting ways of being able to do it by taking that 3rd card, looking at the meaning of that, and the astrological references to that 3rd card to see if that consistently ties with the question you're answering, and also the frame of reference, the environment that you find yourself in that is related to that question. And I know, Arthur, that the pages don't necessarily match up. That's why sometimes different editions of the book get a little confusing. That's why I refer to the serial lessons And if you make notes of the topics in here, I think you'll find that it will be around that same general area. Right? It's so hard when there were various editions to be able to completely cover, depending on which books you have. The green books were the ones that I used and were some of the last that I believe were published by the Church of Light. Now, as we go online, this will become more consistent. All right, so that 5-card spread is something that's very important. So let's take a look then at serial lesson number 23, scope and use. Again, he comes back on page 42 to talk about correspondence. And I want to read this because I don't think that I can necessarily explain it better than what he did. He said the corresponding letter or number are a part of the translation of an Egyptian initiation. And if you remember that from, I believe that was book 2. But in order to handle the cards in the solution of any conceivable problem, as wide a range of accurate correspondences to the principle depicted by the major arcana as possible should be at hand. I have therefore given the astrological correspondent of each major arcana. So you'll see again that as you have run the chart, or you run it after the fact, and you refine your question, you can look to see, is there a confirmation, particularly in that 3rd card of the 5-card spread, or is there consistency in the message that's been given with that? Now, on page 43 or 44, under the heading, the system of presentation, he outlines a series of 10 different ways that we can use this specific deck of cards and be able to apply a logical system. The first, and these are some of his divisions as well, that he will examine each card or card grouping based upon. First of all, there's an assignment of a number. So there's a numerical setting. The second is the astrology. And it's shown why the principle pictured by the arcanum inevitably corresponds to a certain planet or zodiac sign. Number 3 is the human function. So it talks about the various forms and activities that are represented, the alchemy aspects of it, how the principles indicated by the arcanon operate in an alchemical procedure. Now, remember the earlier book on spiritual alchemy, this is one of the tie-ins. So particularly if your question is addressing something that has a positive or negative implication that you can then utilize based on the information that's given, along with the astrological chart, a spiritual alchemy solution to either mitigate or to enhance the various solution or information that's given. The Bible, which is obviously referring to the Hebrew Christian Bible, and the passages that may be associated with that. Obviously, for some people, this is appropriate. For others, they may not feel that this has as much meaning. Masonry, which I thought was always interesting, but if you actually do a list of Hermetic organizations, that you'll see that sometimes a surprising list of groups you may find of different organizations that have a Hermetic foundation, and Masonry being one. For those who are involved with Masonry, it becomes very insightful. Magic, for those people who are interested in that area, it gives some valuable aid and insight. Initiation, if I were to admit examples of the use of the tarot and pointing out the steps in the soul's pilgrimage, it would be sadly remiss. The most valuable application is illustration in connection with the arcana. And this goes back to the idea that the arcanon also is representative of life's journey and a way of understanding where we are in that journey and to be able to live it to its fullest. Occult science, and then the minor and court arcana explanation that are involved. So these are the way that he presents this. And that format's going to be used in each chapter until the last chapter. Now, what I encourage you to do as a learning exercise and way to really incorporate this and internalize the information is that you can bookmark, you can dog ear page, you can do whatever to go to refer back to these. But until I've found with my students that until you write out in your own words what these definitions are and what they mean, it is not going to have as significant of an impact. And you will not internalize it and necessarily be able to easily apply it. So if you do that, you will make faster and more significant strides. Now, I'm not going to go through each of the cards. If we did that, we would be using 2 or 3 of these sessions to do it. I will refer you into Church of Light TV, that there is a 5-course seminar that was done. I think it was a weekend seminar, if I remember right, why that was done. It was done many years ago, but the presentation there is really outstanding in terms of, again, a perspective of the meaning of these along and consistent with what Zane has in the book. But frankly, that does not replace you writing the definitions in your own words. There is nothing, I believe, more valuable than that, because that will start the process for you to be able to understand. And make a list of each of these cards. Now, you also need to, on page 52, it talks about a definition of the minor and major arcanon. And again, how they're used, why they're used, and the representation of that, I want you to review on your own. The second thing that I would also write out and do is to record and make in a notebook, along with what each card represents or group of cards, what the spreads are, when and how to use them. Because again, if you're not asking a yes or no question, but you need further and more detailed explanation along certain lines, the yes or no spread will not be as appropriate. And what we're trying to do is to further understand and connect that external with the internal. We're looking to connect and be consistent in our overall understanding. All right. Serial lesson 24, which is chapter 4, involution and evolution of numbers. I found this to be one of the hardest chapters in the book, mainly because the calculation of the root, key, and decative are critical and will be used not only in this book, but will be carried through to future books. Simply enough, what you do is assign a numerical value to every letter, such as we'll take a name, and we'll go through another example a little later, where you take somebody's date of birth, time of birth, and then their full name, and then make and ascribe a numerical value to that. And then you reduce each one down and then reduce them all together. Now, the way that he uses the key gets a little more complex. And just because of time allocation, I will not go through that example, but admonish you, read and understand that. Go through it until it makes sense to you and work through the examples that are given. Because at first it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, but as you practice it and as you apply it, it will more and more start to open up in terms of meaning. Also, in terms of reverse cards, you get them face up or you get them inverted. Really, you turn again from the top to the bottom, following magnetic principles. But right end up is more favorable than upside down, but reversal does not make a good card bad or a bad one good. It's just like Saturn, just like the various astral entities. Saturn is often considered a very negative planet, but yet it does have positive aspects. And so by depending on the aspect it makes and what it makes an aspect with, can have a positive impact or it can have a negative impact that, again, by defining and using, especially through spiritual alchemy, we learn to counterbalance and we learn to deal with. So just because you pull up a bunch of reverse cards does not mean doom and gloom. And I think that's the moral of that story. It's helping in terms of understanding. And again, you're looking for consistency and significance when combined with the gold key of astrology. Now, that may lead to the question, what if they conflict? Well, then if they're in conflict, then I really have to examine myself and say, am I in the right state of mind? And is the context or the question correct? That I will then come back to it at a later time. I just won't keep doing it till I get the right answer. That's not a good practice. But you may need to come back to it at a later time to make sure that you are not the issue, that you're not. Yeah, of course, the numbers I think would be really interesting as well, Lori. I think that is another good suggestion for a class. It's not that we have lack of topics that need to be covered. So serial lessons 25, 26, 27, and 28 really start tying the meaning of numbers and their tie to vibratory rate. And on page 131 to 133, it is talking about the significance of what happens then if you change a name. But let me give you a further explanation. Let's say that you're looking to buy a property or to acquire something or to do something. Could there be significance in a numerological fashion, again, consistent with the astrological, that would point you more one way than another? And I believe the answer is yes. So it's the overall perspective and using all the tools in the toolkit in an appropriate way to make sure that you have as much information at your disposal to make a decision or to confirm a decision that was made or to change a decision. You don't change just for the heck of change, but you want to make sure that you have a firm foundation. There's also a critical definition found on page 152 through 155, and that is something called the birth path, which is the birth date along with the birth time, along with the name of the individual, and possibly adding even in the place of birth. The ways that you can expand this, the more information that you get, just like within the astrological chart, the more accurate and the more potentially significant the data itself can be. Okay, number 9. So the color of a name. Now, I haven't really thought about this, but we have to reflect on the nature of our own chart and the colors and energies associated with it. And this, outside of the brief mention when we talked about spiritual alchemy, that here we have the real introduction of invisible energies, which we would now refer to as electromagnetic forces that stimulate the thought structures, both on the physical, the inner and outer planes. So we have the astrological influences, we have the influence of thoughts, as spiritual alchemy points out, and then the influence of objects. What would be an example of an influence of an object separate from an astrological influence? What do you think?
Gemstones.
Yeah, and crystals, gemstones. Matter of fact, in a little later, we're going to talk about talisman and some of the others. And something interesting that really popped out to me. But as we surround ourselves with, there is an Eastern philosophy of feng shui, which is the arrangement of furniture, doors, all these types of things. And quite frankly, I think that is what he's referring to, but not calling it by name. And as Meg points out, the name C.C. Zane was chosen as a pen name for the reason of making sure and being consistent with what he was trying to accomplish. So names themselves have deeper meanings. There's color and vibratory rate associated with it. And color is a very broad term for, if you will, a range of frequencies. And it's based upon that numerical key that is calculated. So just briefly, I actually pulled that information in terms of sound, vibration, and radiation. Frankly, all vibration is radiation. It's whether it is harmful and destructive or whether it is positive and constructive. The higher the frequency, the more potential good or potential harm that can be inflicted by it. So we've also know that the lower vibratory rates, which is usually representative of the physical, can also have positive and negative. So these octaves that are given, if you've had music lessons and understand that, or we start talking later on more about the various levels these represent in higher levels and higher octaves, give us more understanding and context. So if you don't understand octave and you go back and read it, don't fear it. Yes.
And essential oils have different megahertz of energy that
absolutely.
So they would influence all kinds of things in your life with the smells that are around you.
Right.
Your sense of smell is your strongest smell. Is your strongest sense.
And it's also associated with memory. We will lock many memories associated with olfactory, much more than auditory.
That's why they brought, when the three kings, just for a reference, when the three kings were searching for the king or, Jesus,
right.
They brought gold, myrrh, and frankincense. And that's because Jesus is an eternal soul. He is the eternal king, and that would help him remember who he was.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, Vega, there is a magic kit that is going to be introduced. We'll give you guys kind of a heads up about this. That's going to be introduced in the future. And what's going to be in that magic kit?
Well, I just got to see it on Thursday night.
Ooh.
And it's pretty cool. It's got a black and red candle. It's got a silk scarf. It's got a wand, a magic wand. And I'm not going to tell you everything because that would be unfair, but there's frankincense in an incense, and there's also frankincense in an oil. And there's going to be a booklet that goes with it that's going to explain it. And I'm trying to think what else was in there. I think I got it all.
Yeah. And that's just a part of representing the environment. And as we utilize these tools to prepare ourselves and to prepare the environment before we engage in these activities, our mind becomes attuned. And I just can't overemphasize the importance of that. And the reason is that last point is metals assume the nature of their environment. And they're heavily influenced by thought vibrations. And I wonder just wonder if that's why, the idea of cursed gold really comes from. The idea that people assign these beliefs or these strong feelings or whatever to these various non-ferrous metals. And all of a sudden, then strange things begin to happen. They do take on the power that our thought vibrations do transfer. And how wonderful and how scary that is at the same time. But how exciting. Again, blue pill, red pill, no excuse anymore. This is something that Vig and I were talking about, that this may be again, a course in itself, or at least a series of lessons. Is this key? So the chronology and its association with the astrological chart is discussed on page 211 in serial lessons 31 and 31, that should be 31 and 32. But understanding, and I took a highlighter and I highlighted my personal, and it really started to put into perspective these various relationships. Now, can someone tell me when we talk about the bull, the lion, and the eagle, what are they referring to here?
The equinox.
The
Equinox?
Taurus, Leo,
Okay, but there's
Scorpio,
something even more.
Scorpio,
Scorpio and Aquarius.
right.
Salt.
But there's
SALT.
It's the
Yep.
Sphinx.
fixed
Salt.
signs. The
The
fixed
four
Meg,
signs.
what?
Fixed signs, that's
It's
right.
the-
Yeah.
It's the and you left out the man, but it's the Sphinx.
It's the Sphinx. Kevin Day, what also does this represent?
The four watchers.
The four watchers representing the four fixed stars. And those are significant because the relationship of, again, these astrological bodies to certain elements drive, if you will, chains of events. And understanding that environment and where we fit in that environment and the perspective, this is a magnificent tool that I think cannot be overstated. And I hope that we can do a lesson on this. So that also leads into a discussion on 231 about the philosophy of cycles and cyclic events. I am a strong believer that both on the physical and astral plane, that there are a series of repeating cycles that we are not only subject to, but whether we acknowledge them or not, influenced by. The failure to understand and utilize that information is at our detriment. The one that I think is most profound right now is the 82-year cycle of which planet? Where are we at? Uranus.
Uranus.
And yep. And if you go back and you look at the major conflicts and the major events in the history of the United States, even predating the formation of the United States, it's tied to that 82-year cycle. World War II, Civil War, Revolutionary War. I mean, you play it forward that somewhere around 2024, things are going to get interesting again. So it's a matter that all of these are in relationships. Meg, you're muted. Okay.
I'm sorry, I wasn't listening. I was reading chats. What did you ask me?
That's all right. I didn't. I said Meg. Meg was. I
Meg.
saw her mouth move, but I did not see Meg. I didn't see it.
I said, "Oh, I can hardly wait."
Yeah, I know. I know exactly. But again, with spiritual alchemy, we have remedies, and this is why this is not predestined. That we have an enormous amount of influence on the personal impact and effect. And that's the hope that Zane presents, that many times others are left and feeling helpless and abandoned. And his discussion of this, both on the physical and the astral plane, starting on 231, will be further elaborated on. So we've gone an hour. In summary, which is what we agreed to, we would go an hour. You need to create your own working book of meanings, layouts, and symbology. Failure to do this slows the intake. Do you have to do it? Absolutely not. But it increases the impact and the significance in your life. It's also very important to understand the nature of numbers, colors, and other symbols, and the broader perspective of the interrelationship. So practice the use of the tarot in combination with casting a chart, which we will get into in book 10 and lesson 10. But that combination together, which I did not respect, I did not really acknowledge until going through the materials on the need to do them together. They are not standalone, though people often use them as standalone. They are best when combined and more powerful when they're combined. All right, so what we'll do is we'll go through the closing ceremony, then we'll do a Q&A and go from there. So, Ms. Viega?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me all right?
Hear you loud and clear.
Good job. Eternal brothers and sisters, we are now about to close the Church of Light meeting in the customary manner. And in so doing, let us consider seriously the kind of life it is fitting a brother and a sister of the light should live. We must each leave this meeting to go about our daily duties, but unless we take with us some higher thought and nobler purpose, we have spent our time here in vain. For knowledge lacking goodness leads to naught but self-undoing. Each brother and sister has pledged himself or herself to put forth an effort to alleviate physical and mental suffering, to dispel ignorance, and to spread truth. Therefore, even as we would be helped by those of our religion who are more enlightened, let us make every effort to assist others, and let each so conduct himself or herself as to be an example of moral purity, radiating life, light, and love upon the world of their endeavors. As has been the custom for eons past, let us arise and face the west, wherein at close of day the solar orb softly sinks to rest and relinquishes his sovereignty to his heavenly consort. And let us bear in mind that even as the orb of night reflects the glory of the sun when darkness would shroud the earth, so should each earnest brother and sister reflect the radiance of our teachings, even amidst the darkness of our ignorance, lighting somewhat the most obscure as well as the most luminous paths which they are forced to tread. The lunar mother is symbolized in the minds of our ancient brethren as sustaining nature, upon whose breast we lean, and from whom we draw such experiences as nourish and expand our immortal soul. Let us now make the symbol of the religion of the stars. We stand to indicate active volition with right hand raised to heaven in aspirations to science, wisdom, and power, and the left hand pointing to earth, signifying the desire to reflect the divine will and evincing an unconquerable determination to dominate all acts of life by the Spirit. You may lower your hand and I will pronounce the benediction. O thou eternal Spirit, in whom we live, move, breathe, and have our being, dismiss us now with thy blessings. And as we travel along our several ways, let ministers of thine guard our footsteps and light our pathway, that we may not stumble in our blindness. From our hearts, we thank those who have assisted in our researches. And now as we depart, we consecrate our efforts to the cause of truth and beneficence. So shall it be. Thank you, everyone.
All right, so we will
Thank
stop.
you.
We will